The rain hammered against the windows of the downtown Seattle coffee shop as Sarah Martinez pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. She'd been sitting in the corner booth for nearly 2 hours, nursing the same cold cup of coffee while waiting for her interview appointment. At 28, Sarah had learned that patience was everything when you were trying to rebuild your life from scratch. The job posting had been simple enough: security consultant for a private firm specializing in corporate protection services. Nothing fancy, nothing that required extensive background checks or military clearance. Just honest work that would help her pay the bills and maybe start putting some money aside for the future she was trying to build. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. The interviewer was running 15 minutes late. She sighed and looked around the busy coffee shop, watching the afternoon crowd of office workers and college students going about their normal lives. Sometimes she envied that normalcy, the simple routine of a regular job and predictable schedule. Her fingers unconsciously traced the edge of her long-sleeved shirt, feeling the outline of the tattoo that covered most of her left forearm. The intricate design was hidden beneath the fabric, but she could feel every line and curve of the ink that told a story she rarely shared with anyone. Most people saw tattoos and made assumptions, especially about women with extensive body art. Sarah had learned to keep hers covered during job interviews. The coffee shop door chimed as a middle-aged man in a crisp business suit entered, scanning the room with the methodical gaze of someone accustomed to assessing situations quickly. His eyes settled on Sarah, and she recognized the look of someone who had spent time in military or law enforcement circles. There was something about the way he carried himself, the way his eyes moved across the room, that spoke of professional training. "Sarah Martinez," he asked, approaching her table with a firm handshake. "I'm Tom Bradley from Sentinel Security Solutions. Sorry I'm late. Traffic was a nightmare coming from the waterfront district." Sarah stood to shake his hand, noting the strength of his grip and the way he made direct eye contact. "No problem at all. I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me." Tom settled into the seat across from her, pulling out a tablet and a folder thick with paperwork. "I've reviewed your application, and I have to say your qualifications are impressive. Administrative experience, customer service background, and your references all check out perfectly. But I'm curious about something." Sarah felt her stomach tighten slightly. There was always a but in these conversations, always something that didn't quite add up in the eyes of potential employers. "What would you like to know?" "Well, this position involves working with some high-profile clients, including several retired military officers and some active-duty personnel on leave. The work can be demanding, and we need someone who can handle themselves in potentially stressful situations." Tom leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah's face. "Your resume shows steady employment, but there's a gap of about 3 years. Can you tell me about that?" This was the question Sarah had been dreading. The 3-year gap wasn't something she could easily explain without getting into details that most civilian employers wouldn't understand. She'd practiced various ways of addressing this issue, but none of them felt entirely honest. "I was dealing with some personal health issues," she said carefully. "It took some time to get back on my feet, but I'm fully recovered now and ready to get back to work." Tom nodded, making notes on his tablet. "I understand. Health issues can be challenging, especially when they impact your ability to maintain steady employment. Can you tell me more about how you handle stress? This job involves working with clients who have extensive military backgrounds, and they tend to have high expectations." Sarah straightened in her chair. "I work well under pressure. I'm detail-oriented, reliable, and I understand the importance of maintaining professional standards. I may not have military experience myself, but I respect the discipline and dedication that comes with that background." "That's good to hear," Tom continued making notes. "Now, I should mention that several of our clients are former Navy SEALs. They're involved in corporate security consulting, and they can be particular about the people they work with. They value authenticity and have little patience for anyone who tries to inflate their credentials or background." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She wasn't sure why Tom was emphasizing this point, but something in his tone suggested he was leading up to something specific. "I understand completely," she replied. "I've always believed in being honest about my qualifications and experience. I would never claim to have background or training that I don't actually possess." Tom set down his tablet and looked directly at Sarah. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Unfortunately, we've had some issues in the past with people who have tried to exaggerate their military connections or even claim service they never performed. It's a serious problem in this industry. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering topics ranging from Sarah's availability to her salary expectations. Throughout the discussion, she noticed that Tom kept returning to questions about military experience and how she would interact with former service members. By the time the interview concluded, Sarah felt reasonably confident but couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than a simple security consulting position. "I'll be in touch within the next few days," Tom said as they prepared to leave. "We're interviewing several candidates, but your background looks promising. Do you have any questions for me?" Sarah gathered her jacket and purse. "Just one. You mentioned working with former Navy SEALs specifically. Is there a particular reason why that's such an important part of this position?" Tom paused, and for a moment, Sarah saw something shift in his expression. "Let's just say that our clients take authenticity very seriously. They've developed good instincts for spotting people who aren't what they claim to be. But that shouldn't be a concern for someone with nothing to hide." As Sarah walked back to her car, Tom's words echoed in her mind. There had been something almost like a warning in his tone, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what he was trying to tell her. She'd been completely honest during the interview, so she had no reason to worry about authenticity or background checks. 3 days later, Sarah's phone rang with news that she'd gotten the job. Tom's voice was professional but friendly as he explained her start date and initial assignment details. "You'll be working primarily with our Maritime Security Division," he explained. "We provide consultation services for shipping companies and private yacht owners who need security assessment and planning." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. Maritime security sounded like interesting work, and it would give her a chance to use some of the skills she'd developed during her years away from traditional employment. "That sounds perfect. When would you like me to start?" "Monday morning, 8 a.m. sharp. I'll email you the address and parking information." "Oh, and Sarah?" Tom's voice carried that same subtle warning tone she'd noticed during their interview. "Make sure you bring proper identification and be prepared for a thorough orientation process. Our clients expect the highest standards of professionalism." "Of course, I'll be ready." After hanging up the phone, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness about starting her new job. The work sounded challenging and potentially rewarding, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Tom was holding back important information about what the position would actually involve. That weekend, Sarah spent time preparing for her first day. She selected conservative business attire that would maintain her professional appearance while keeping her tattoo completely covered. She researched maritime security basics and reviewed her notes from the interview to make sure she understood the company's expectations. Sunday evening, as she laid out her clothes for the next day, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed Tom's name, which surprised her. It seemed unusual for an employer to call the night before someone's first day unless there was a problem. "Hi, Tom," she answered. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," Tom replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I just wanted to give you a heads up about tomorrow. You'll be meeting with some of our senior consultants, and they'll want to get to know you pretty quickly. They tend to ask direct questions, so just be prepared to be completely honest about your background and experience." Sarah felt that familiar knot forming in her stomach. "Of course. Is there something specific I should be prepared to discuss?" "Nothing you shouldn't already be comfortable talking about," Tom said carefully. "Just remember what we discussed about authenticity being important to our clients. They've seen a lot of people try to embellish their credentials, especially when it comes to military service or specialized training." After ending the call, Sarah sat on her couch staring at the phone. Tom's repeated emphasis on military authenticity was beginning to feel less like general advice and more like a specific warning. She wondered if there had been recent incidents with employees misrepresenting their backgrounds, or if this was simply standard procedure for a security consulting firm. She rolled up her sleeve and looked at the tattoo on her forearm. The detailed design incorporated elements that held deep personal meaning, symbols and imagery that represented experiences and commitments that had shaped her life. Most people who saw it assumed it was decorative artwork, maybe something with cultural significance or personal symbolism. Very few people understood what the specific elements actually meant. Sarah had learned to keep the tattoo covered not because she was ashamed of it, but because it tended to raise questions she wasn't always prepared to answer. The design was distinctive enough that certain people would recognize its significance immediately, while others would see nothing more than an attractive piece of body art. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical Seattle weather that matched Sarah's nervous energy as she drove to her new workplace. The address Tom had provided led her to a sleek office building in the waterfront district, the kind of modern structure that housed consulting firms, law offices, and other professional services. Sentinel Security Solutions occupied the entire 15th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Elliott Bay. Sarah checked in with the receptionist, a friendly woman who seemed genuinely pleased to welcome a new team member. "Tom should be with you in just a moment," the receptionist said. "He's finishing up a call with one of our clients. Can I get you some coffee while you wait?" Sarah accepted the offer and spent a few minutes admiring the office's professional atmosphere. The walls displayed framed certificates, awards, and photographs that suggested the company had established relationships with various military and law enforcement organizations. Several of the photos showed groups of serious-looking men and women in military dress uniforms or tactical gear. "Sarah, welcome to Sentinel," Tom's voice came from behind her. She turned to see him approaching with another man, someone who immediately commanded attention despite his civilian business attire. The second man was probably in his mid-40s, with short-cropped hair, intense blue eyes, and the kind of bearing that spoke of long military experience. His handshake was firm, his eye contact direct and assessing. "This is Commander James Richardson," Tom said by way of introduction. "He heads up our maritime division and will be your primary supervisor for the next few weeks." Commander Richardson studied Sarah with the kind of professional assessment she'd learned to recognize. "Pleasure to meet you, Sarah. Tom tells me you're excited about getting into maritime security consulting. That's good. This field requires people who are genuinely interested in the work, not just looking for any job that pays well." "I'm definitely interested," Sarah replied. "I'm looking forward to learning more about how the industry works and how I can contribute to your team's success." The commander nodded approvingly. "Excellent attitude. Why don't we start with a tour of the facilities, and then we'll sit down to discuss your initial assignments and training schedule." As they walked through the office, Sarah noticed that several employees wore military-style clothing or accessories that suggested service backgrounds. The overall atmosphere was more disciplined and formal than typical corporate environments, with an emphasis on precision and attention to detail that reminded her of military installations. "Most of our consultants come from Navy or Coast Guard backgrounds," Commander Richardson explained as they passed a conference room where several people were reviewing what appeared to be nautical charts and security assessments. "We specialize in maritime threats and protection strategies, so experience with naval operations is extremely valuable." Sarah listened attentively, taking mental notes about the company's structure and client base. Everything she was seeing and hearing suggested a legitimate, professional operation with strong ties to the military community. They concluded the tour in a smaller conference room where Commander Richardson gestured for Sarah to take a seat at a polished wooden table. Tom joined them, pulling out a thick folder of paperwork and orientation materials. "Now then," the commander said, settling into his chair with the easy authority of someone accustomed to conducting briefings. "Let's talk about what you'll be doing here and what we expect from our team members." Sarah felt ready to begin this new chapter of her life, though she couldn't entirely shake the feeling that her new colleagues were evaluating her more carefully than seemed typical for an entry-level position. Something about their attention to detail and emphasis on military authenticity suggested there was more to this job than she fully understood. But she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. After 3 years of rebuilding her life, she was finally ready to move forward with confidence and purpose. Commander Richardson opened the thick folder and spread several documents across the conference table. Sarah recognized standard employment paperwork, security clearance forms, and what appeared to be detailed background check authorization documents. "Before we begin your orientation, we need to complete some administrative requirements," he explained, his tone remaining professional but carrying an undertone of serious business. "Given the nature of our clients and the sensitive information you'll have access to, we conduct thorough background investigations on all employees." Sarah nodded, having expected this level of scrutiny for a security consulting position. That's completely understandable. I brought all my identification and reference information. Excellent. The commander slid a form across the table. This authorization allows us to conduct a comprehensive background check, including employment history, criminal records, financial background, and military service verification. Sarah paused at the last item. Military service verification? I haven't served in the military. Standard procedure, Tom interjected quickly. We check everyone, regardless of their background. Too many people try to embellish their credentials in this industry, so we verify everything. Commander Richardson's eyes remained fixed on Sarah as she signed the paperwork. You'd be surprised how often we encounter people who claim military experience they don't actually have. Last month, we had someone interview for a position who claimed to be a former Marine Force recon operator. Turned out he'd never even completed basic training. That's terrible, Sarah replied honestly. I can't imagine lying about something like that, especially to people who actually served. Indeed, the commander collected the signed documents. Military service is something that should be honored and respected, not fabricated for personal gain. Those of us who have actually worn the uniform take these matters very seriously. As they continued through the orientation process, Sarah learned more about Sentinel's client base and operational procedures. The company provided security consulting for a diverse range of maritime businesses, from commercial shipping companies to high-end yacht owners who traveled in potentially dangerous waters. Your initial assignment will involve supporting our threat assessment team, Commander Richardson explained, pulling out a series of nautical charts and security reports. You'll be reviewing intelligence reports, updating security protocols, and assisting with client briefings. It's detail-oriented work that requires absolute accuracy. Sarah studied the materials, noting the professional quality of the reports and the sophisticated level of analysis involved. This was clearly serious business, not the simple administrative work she'd initially expected. The learning curve can be steep, the commander continued, but Tom tells me you're intelligent and motivated. Those are the qualities we need most. Experience can be taught, but integrity and work ethic are character traits that can't be trained. Over the next few hours, Sarah received extensive briefings on company policies, security protocols, and client confidentiality requirements. Everything she learned reinforced her impression that Sentinel was a legitimate, professional organization with high standards and important responsibilities. During a break in the orientation session, Tom pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. How are you feeling about everything so far? I know it's a lot of information to absorb in one day. It's definitely comprehensive, Sarah admitted. But I appreciate the thoroughness. It's clear that this company takes its responsibilities seriously. Tom nodded, but his expression suggested he had something more specific on his mind. Sarah, I want to ask you something directly, and I need you to be completely honest with me. The serious tone in his voice made Sarah's stomach tighten. Of course, what do you need to know? Have you ever had any connection to military or naval operations? Any training, experience, or association that you might not have mentioned during your interview? Sarah felt confused by the question. No, nothing like that. I've been completely honest about my background. Why are you asking? Tom studied her face carefully. It's probably nothing, but Commander Richardson mentioned that something about you seemed familiar. He couldn't place it, but he said you carry yourself in a way that suggests possible military experience. I've never served in the military, Sarah repeated firmly. I have no idea what he might be picking up on, but it's not military training. Fair enough, Tom said, though he didn't look entirely convinced. Just remember what we discussed about authenticity. If there's anything in your background that might come up during the investigation, it's better to address it now rather than have it surface later. When they returned to the conference room, Commander Richardson was reviewing Sarah's employment application with intense focus. He looked up as they entered, his expression unreadable. Sarah, I've been thinking about our conversation earlier, he said, setting down the paperwork. You mentioned that you've never served in the military, but I'm curious about your familiarity with nautical terminology and maritime operations. Your questions during the briefing showed more understanding than I typically see from civilian employees. Sarah felt increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of these conversations. I've always been interested in maritime subjects. I did some research before starting here because I wanted to be prepared. That's commendable, the commander replied. Preparation and attention to detail are important qualities, but there's something about your demeanor that suggests more than casual research. Are you certain there's nothing in your background that might give you insight into military or naval operations? The repeated questioning was beginning to feel like an interrogation, and Sarah couldn't understand why her new colleagues seemed so suspicious of her background. She'd been completely honest during the hearing process, and her employment records clearly showed no military service. I'm absolutely certain, she said firmly. I think you might be overanalyzing things. Some people are just naturally observant or have good instincts for understanding complex information. Commander Richardson exchanged a glance with Tom that Sarah couldn't interpret. You're probably right. It's an occupational hazard in our business. We tend to look for hidden meanings and connections even when they don't exist. The rest of the orientation proceeded smoothly, with Sarah receiving assignments for her first week of work and access credentials for the company's computer systems. By the time she left the office that evening, she felt confident about her new position despite the strange undercurrent of suspicion she detected in some of her colleagues. That night, Sarah called her best friend Maria to share the news about her new job. Maria had been supportive throughout the difficult years when Sarah was rebuilding her life, and she was genuinely excited to hear about this new opportunity. It sounds like a great company, Maria said after hearing the details. But what was all that weird questioning about military experience? That seems like a strange thing to focus on if you've already told them you've never served. Sarah had been wondering the same thing. I think they've had problems with people lying about their backgrounds, so they're extra cautious now. It's probably just standard procedure for security companies. Maybe, Maria replied, though she sounded skeptical. Just be careful, okay? Sometimes when people are looking for something specific, they'll find it whether it's actually there or not. The next morning, Sarah arrived at work early, eager to begin her first full day and prove herself as a valuable team member. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, ensuring that her tattoo remained completely covered while maintaining a professional appearance. Commander Richardson was already in his office when she arrived, and he called her in for a brief meeting before the day officially began. I want to apologize if yesterday's questions seemed excessive, he said, gesturing for her to take a seat. We've had some unfortunate experiences with dishonest employees, and it's made us perhaps overly cautious about vetting new team members. I understand completely, Sarah replied. Trust is essential in this kind of work, and you need to be certain about the people you're working with. Exactly. The commander leaned back in his chair. I've reviewed your initial assignments, and I think you'll find the work challenging but rewarding. You'll be working closely with our senior analysts, and they'll expect high standards of accuracy and attention to detail. Sarah spent the morning reviewing intelligence reports and security assessments, learning the company's analytical methods and reporting procedures. The work was indeed challenging, requiring her to process complex information and identify potential threats or vulnerabilities in various maritime scenarios. During her lunch break, she overheard a conversation between two senior consultants that made her pause. They were discussing a recent incident involving someone who had attempted to gain access to a military facility using fraudulent credentials. The scary part is how sophisticated these imposters are getting, one of them was saying. This guy had fake documentation, military-style clothing, even convincing knowledge of operational procedures. If it hadn't been for one sharp-eyed security guard who noticed an inconsistency in his uniform, he might have gotten through. That's exactly why we're so careful about background checks, the other consultant replied. You can't be too paranoid in this business. People will go to incredible lengths to create false identities and infiltrate secure facilities. Sarah felt a chill as she listened to this conversation. The emphasis on detecting imposters and fraudulent military claims was beginning to feel like more than just general security awareness. It seemed like her new colleagues were actively looking for signs of deception in everyone they encountered. That afternoon, Commander Richardson introduced Sarah to Dr. Patricia Wang, the company's senior intelligence analyst. Dr. Wang was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had spent decades working in military intelligence before transitioning to the private sector. Sarah will be assisting with threat assessment reports, the commander explained. I'd like her to shadow you for the next few days to learn our analytical methods and reporting standards. Dr. Wang studied Sarah with the same intense scrutiny that seemed to characterize everyone at Sentinel. Excellent. I always enjoy working with new analysts, especially those who bring fresh perspectives to the work. As they began reviewing current intelligence reports, Dr. Wang proved to be an excellent teacher with deep knowledge of maritime security threats and geopolitical factors that influenced global shipping. Sarah found herself genuinely fascinated by the complexity of the work and the sophisticated analysis required to identify potential risks. You're picking this up quickly, Dr. Wang observed after Sarah successfully identified several key vulnerability factors in a shipping route assessment. Most new analysts need weeks to develop this level of understanding. Have you done similar work before? Sarah felt the familiar knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. No, this is completely new to me. I've always been good at analyzing complex information and identifying patterns. Interesting, Dr. Wang replied, making notes in Sarah's training file. You have excellent instincts for this kind of work. It's almost like you have some background experience that's helping you understand these concepts more quickly than usual. The repeated suggestions that Sarah possessed knowledge or experience beyond what she'd claimed were becoming increasingly uncomfortable. She couldn't understand why her colleagues seemed so determined to find hidden meanings in her natural aptitude for the work. As the week progressed, Sarah continued to excel in her assignments while struggling with the persistent feeling that her coworkers were analyzing her as much as they were training her. She noticed people watching her reactions during briefings, paying attention to her questions and comments in ways that seemed to go beyond normal supervisory interest. Friday afternoon, Commander Richardson called Sarah into his office for her first formal performance evaluation. She expected routine feedback about her initial week's work, but the conversation took an unexpected direction. Your performance has been exceptional, he began, reviewing notes from various supervisors. Dr. Wang is particularly impressed with your analytical skills and intuitive understanding of maritime security concepts. Tom has noted your professional demeanor and attention to detail. By all accounts, you're exactly the kind of employee we hope to find. Sarah felt relieved to hear the positive feedback. Thank you. I'm really enjoying the work and learning a lot from everyone. However, the commander continued, and Sarah's heart sank at the familiar qualifier. There are some concerns that I need to address with you. What kind of concerns? Sarah asked, though she suspected she knew what was coming. Commander Richardson leaned forward in his chair, his expression serious. Several of our senior staff members have noticed that you demonstrate knowledge and instincts that seem inconsistent with someone who has no military or maritime experience. Dr. Wang mentioned that you understood tactical concepts that typically require specialized training. Tom observed that you use terminology and phrasing that suggests familiarity with military communications protocols. Sarah felt her frustration building. I don't understand what you're suggesting. I've been completely honest about my background, and I've never claimed to have any military experience. I'm not suggesting you've been dishonest, the commander replied carefully. But I am suggesting that there may be aspects of your background that you haven't shared with us, either because you don't think they're relevant or because you have personal reasons for keeping them private. The conversation was clearly heading toward some kind of confrontation, and Sarah couldn't understand what had triggered such intense suspicion from her colleagues. She'd performed well in her assignments, maintained professional behavior, and been honest about her qualifications and experience. Commander Richardson, I appreciate your feedback about my performance, but I'm concerned about these repeated questions regarding my background. I've provided all the information requested during the hearing process, and I've been completely truthful about my qualifications and experience. The commander studied her for a long moment before responding. Sarah, I'm going to be direct with you. In my 25 years of naval service, I've developed good instincts for recognizing people with military training and experience. Something about you suggests a background that you haven't disclosed. I'm not accusing you of lying, but I am asking you to consider whether there's anything you've overlooked or chosen not to mention. Sarah felt cornered by the persistent questioning. She'd been honest about everything relevant to the job, but it was becoming clear that her new colleagues suspected her of hiding something significant about her past. The irony was that the more they questioned her honesty, the less inclined she felt to share personal details that weren't directly related to her work performance. "I understand your concerns," she said finally, "but I don't know how else to address them. I've been truthful about my background and qualifications. If my natural abilities for this work are causing suspicion, I'm not sure what I can do about that." Commander Richardson nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Your work performance has been excellent, and that's what ultimately matters. I just wanted to address these concerns directly rather than let them create tension in the workplace." As Sarah left the commander's office, she felt deeply unsettled by the conversation. She was performing well in a job she enjoyed, but the persistent suspicion from her colleagues was creating an uncomfortable working environment. She wondered if this level of scrutiny was normal for security companies, or if there was something specific about her that had triggered their concerns. That weekend, she found herself thinking about the tattoo on her arm and wondering if she should simply show it to her colleagues to put an end to their speculation about her background. The design would certainly answer some of their questions, though it might also raise new ones that she wasn't prepared to address. Monday morning would mark the beginning of her second week at Sentinel Security Solutions. Sarah hoped that her continued good performance would eventually overcome whatever suspicions her colleagues harbored about her past. She was determined to prove herself through her work, regardless of what anyone might think about her background or qualifications. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the situation was building towards some kind of confrontation that would force her to reveal more about her past than she was comfortable sharing in a professional setting. Monday morning arrived with an unexpected twist that would change everything for Sarah Martinez. As she settled at her desk to begin her second week at Sentinel Security Solutions, Tom Bradley approached with a mixture of excitement and concern written across his face. "Sarah, we have a situation," he said, keeping his voice low despite the early hour and mostly empty office. "One of our biggest clients is flying in today for an emergency consultation. They need immediate threat assessment for a high-value cargo shipment that's been experiencing security concerns." Sarah looked up from her computer, where she'd been reviewing the maritime intelligence reports that had become part of her morning routine. "What kind of assistance do you need from me?" "The client specifically requested our most skilled analysts for this consultation," Tom explained, glancing around to ensure their conversation remained private. "Commander Richardson recommended you based on your exceptional performance last week. This could be a significant opportunity for you, but I need to warn you about something." The familiar knot of anxiety formed in Sarah's stomach. What kind of warning? Tom pulled a chair closer to her desk and sat down, his expression serious. "The client is Admiral Patricia Hawthorne, retired Navy. She's one of the most decorated female naval officers in recent history, and she has zero tolerance for anyone who might misrepresent their background or qualifications. She specifically works with our company because of our reputation for authenticity and military expertise." "I understand," Sarah replied, though she felt her stress level rising. "But I've been completely honest about my background. There shouldn't be any issues with authenticity." "I'm sure there won't be," Tom said, though his tone suggested underlying concern. "But Admiral Hawthorne has an incredible ability to assess people quickly. She picks up on details that others might miss, and she's encountered numerous individuals over the years who have attempted to deceive her about their military connections." Sarah felt increasingly frustrated by the persistent emphasis on military deception and authenticity. "Tom, I appreciate the warning, but I'm starting to feel like everyone here suspects me of lying about something. I've been completely truthful about my background and qualifications." Tom held up a hand in a gesture of apology. "You're right, and I'm sorry if we've made you feel that way. It's just that this industry attracts a lot of people who try to embellish their credentials, and we've learned to be cautious. Your performance has been outstanding, and that's what really matters." 3 hours later, Sarah found herself in Sentinel's main conference room, surrounded by nautical charts, intelligence reports, and sophisticated threat assessment materials. Admiral Patricia Hawthorne had arrived precisely on schedule, accompanied by 2 members of her private security team. Admiral Hawthorne was an imposing woman in her mid-50s, with silver-gray hair pulled back in a precise military style and piercing green eyes that seemed to catalog everything they encountered. She moved with the confident authority of someone accustomed to command, and her handshake conveyed both strength and careful assessment. "Ms. Martinez, I understand you're one of Sentinel's rising analysts," the Admiral said by way of introduction. "Commander Richardson speaks very highly of your analytical skills and attention to detail." "Thank you, Admiral. I'm honored to have the opportunity to work on your security assessment," Sarah replied, maintaining professional composure despite feeling like she was under intense scrutiny. "Before we begin," Admiral Hawthorne said, settling into her chair with military precision, "I'd like to understand your background and experience with maritime security analysis. This assessment involves some highly sensitive information, and I need to be confident in the capabilities of everyone working on it." Sarah provided a brief summary of her education, work experience, and the training she'd received at Sentinel over the past week. Throughout her explanation, she noticed that Admiral Hawthorne listened with the kind of focused attention that suggested she was analyzing more than just the words being spoken. "Interesting," the Admiral said when Sarah finished. "You've accomplished quite a lot in a short time here. Dr. Wang mentioned that you demonstrated unusually sophisticated understanding of tactical concepts during your first week. That's impressive for someone without formal military training." Once again, Sarah found herself defending her natural aptitude for the work. "I've always been good at analyzing complex information and understanding strategic concepts. I think some people just have intuitive grasp for these kinds of systems." Admiral Hawthorne nodded thoughtfully. "Indeed, some individuals do possess natural strategic thinking abilities. However, the specific terminology and analytical approaches that Dr. Wang described suggest more than intuitive understanding." Before Sarah could respond, Commander Richardson entered the conference room with the latest intelligence updates for the Admiral's security assessment. "Admiral, we've received updated threat analysis for the shipping route you're concerned about. The situation appears more complex than initially reported." For the next 2 hours, Sarah found herself deeply engaged in sophisticated threat assessment work that challenged every analytical skill she possessed. Admiral Hawthorne's cargo shipment involved transporting sensitive materials through waters that had experienced increased piracy activity, and the security planning required detailed understanding of both maritime tactics and geopolitical factors. "The primary vulnerability appears to be this choke point near the Malacca Strait," Sarah observed, pointing to a specific location on the nautical chart. "The shipping lane narrows significantly here, reducing maneuverability options and creating opportunities for coordinated attacks from multiple vectors." Admiral Hawthorne leaned forward with interest. "Excellent analysis. What countermeasures would you recommend for addressing this vulnerability?" Sarah studied the charts and intelligence reports, considering various tactical options. "I'd recommend implementing a multi-layered defensive approach. Increase the security escort during the choke point transit, establish communication protocols with regional naval forces, and consider timing the passage to coincide with increased patrol activity in the area." "Very good," the Admiral replied, making notes on her tablet. "What about electronic countermeasures and communication security during the transit?" Without thinking, Sarah launched into a detailed discussion of radio frequency management, encrypted communication protocols, and electronic warfare considerations that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of military communication systems. She outlined specific countermeasures for different types of electronic threats and explained how various communication security protocols could be layered for maximum protection. The room fell silent as Sarah finished her analysis. She looked up to find Admiral Hawthorne, Commander Richardson, and Tom Bradley all staring at her with expressions of surprise and suspicion. "Ms. Martinez," Admiral Hawthorne said carefully, "that was an extraordinarily sophisticated analysis of military communication security protocols. The level of detail you provided suggests extensive training and experience with classified communication systems." Sarah felt her heart racing as she realized she'd revealed far more knowledge than someone with her claimed background should possess. I've done a lot of reading about maritime security. I wanted to be prepared for this kind of work." Admiral Hawthorne exchanged a meaningful look with Commander Richardson. "Ms. Martinez, I've been working with military communication systems for over 30 years. What you just described isn't information that can be learned from reading books or conducting research. Those are operational details that require hands-on experience with classified systems. The accusation hanging in the air was clear, and Sarah felt trapped between her desire to maintain her privacy and the obvious impossibility of explaining her knowledge without revealing information about her past that she'd hoped to keep private. "I understand your concern," Sarah said carefully, "but I can assure you that I've never had access to classified military systems." Admiral Hawthorne studied Sarah with the intense focus of someone accustomed to detecting deception. "Ms. Martinez, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need you to answer it honestly. Have you ever received training or experience with military operations, particularly naval or special operations activities?" Sarah felt the weight of the Admiral's authority and the expectation of complete honesty. "Admiral, I've been completely truthful about my employment history and qualifications. I understand that my analytical abilities might seem unusual, but I've never claimed to have military experience." "That's not what I asked," Admiral Hawthorne replied firmly. "I asked whether you've received training or experience with military operations. There's a difference between claiming military experience and actually having received such training." The distinction was crucial, and Sarah realized that the Admiral was far too experienced to be satisfied with evasive answers. The room's tension was palpable as everyone waited for her response. "Admiral, there are aspects of my personal history that I prefer to keep private, but they don't affect my ability to perform my current job responsibilities," Sarah said finally. Admiral Hawthorne leaned back in her chair, her expression shifting from suspicion to something that looked almost like recognition. "Ms. Martinez, privacy is one thing, but potential misrepresentation is another matter entirely. If you have military training or experience that you haven't disclosed, it's important that we understand the nature and extent of that background." Commander Richardson cleared his throat. "Sarah, I think it's time for complete honesty. Admiral Hawthorne has legitimate concerns about security and authenticity, and your evasive answers aren't helping the situation." Sarah felt cornered by the persistent questioning and the obvious suspicion of her colleagues. She'd hoped to keep certain aspects of her past private, not because she was ashamed of them, but because they were personal and she didn't think they were relevant to her current civilian employment. "I understand everyone's concerns," she said, her voice steady despite her internal turmoil. "But I need you to understand that some aspects of a person's past are private for good reasons, and revealing them isn't always simple or appropriate in a professional setting." Admiral Hawthorne's expression softened slightly. "Ms. Martinez, I appreciate the complexity of personal privacy, but we're dealing with serious security considerations here. Your demonstrated knowledge of classified operational procedures raises legitimate questions about your background and clearance status." The word clearance sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She realized that her attempts to maintain privacy had created a situation where her colleagues suspected her of far more serious deceptions than she'd ever intended. "Admiral, I want to assure you that I have no current or recent connections to any military or intelligence organizations. My knowledge comes from personal experience that I've chosen to keep private for personal reasons, not professional ones." "Personal experience with military operations?" Commander Richardson asked, his tone suggesting he understood the implications of that phrase. Sarah felt the conversation spiraling beyond her control. She'd wanted to maintain normal civilian employment without having to explain or justify her past, but it was becoming clear that her colleagues wouldn't be satisfied with partial answers or vague explanations. "Commander, Admiral, I understand your concerns about authenticity and security," Sarah said, making a decision that she'd hoped to avoid. "What I'm about to tell you must remain confidential, and I'm only sharing this information because you've made it clear that you won't accept anything less than complete transparency." Admiral Hawthorne nodded solemnly. "You have my word that any personal information you share will be treated with appropriate discretion and confidentiality." Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that once she revealed the truth about her background, there would be no going back to the simple civilian life she'd been trying to build. 3 years ago, I completed 8 years of service with Naval Special Warfare. I was a member of SEAL Team 7, with deployments to Afghanistan and Syria. I left the Navy with the rank of Petty Officer First Class. The silence that followed her revelation was deafening. Admiral Hawthorne's eyes widened with surprise, while Commander Richardson looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Tom Bradley simply stared at Sarah as if seeing her for the first time. "You're a Navy SEAL?" Admiral Hawthorne asked, her voice filled with a mixture of respect and disbelief. "Former Navy SEAL," Sarah corrected. "I've been trying to build a civilian life for the past 3 years, and I didn't think my military service was relevant to this position." Admiral Hawthorne shook her head slowly. "Ms. Martinez, your military service isn't just relevant, it's extraordinary. Female SEALs are extremely rare, and your combat deployment record represents exceptional service to your country." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension as her secret was finally revealed. She'd spent 3 years trying to integrate into civilian life without having to explain or justify her military background. But it was becoming clear that her past would always be part of her identity, whether she wanted it to be or not. "Why didn't you mention this during your interview or on your employment application?" Tom asked, his voice filled with bewilderment. "Because I wanted this job to be about my current qualifications and abilities, not about my military service," Sarah explained. "I've been trying to build a civilian career based on what I can contribute now, not what I did in the military." Admiral Hawthorne studied Sarah with new understanding and respect. "That's admirable, Ms. Martinez, but you must understand that your military background changes everything about this situation. Your analytical skills, tactical understanding, and communication expertise aren't unusual aptitudes. They're the result of elite military training and combat experience." The revelation transformed the entire dynamic of the meeting. Instead of questioning Sarah's qualifications, her colleagues were now grappling with the realization that they had an exceptionally qualified former special operations warrior working as an entry-level analyst. But Sarah could see that new questions were forming in their minds, and she suspected that revealing her military background would create new complications rather than resolving the existing ones. The atmosphere in the conference room had completely shifted. Admiral Hawthorne sat back in her chair, studying Sarah with a mixture of professional respect and genuine curiosity. Commander Richardson looked like he was mentally recalculating everything he thought he knew about their newest employee. Tom Bradley simply stared, processing the revelation that the woman he'd hired for an entry-level position was actually one of the most elite warriors in the American military. "Ms. Martinez," Admiral Hawthorne began carefully, "I need to ask you some direct questions about your service record and current status. I hope you understand that this isn't idle curiosity. There are important security and legal considerations that we need to address." Sarah nodded, having expected this line of inquiry once her background was revealed. "I understand, Admiral. Ask whatever you need to know." "First, what was your military occupational specialty, and what specific training did you receive during your 8 years of service?" "I was a special warfare operator, MOS SO-1, Sarah replied, slipping unconsciously back into military terminology. "I completed BUD-S, SQT, and specialized training in maritime operations, close quarters combat, advanced weapon systems, and tactical communications. I also completed language training in Arabic and Pashto." Admiral Hawthorne made notes on her tablet. "Your deployment history." 3 deployments to Afghanistan between 2018 and 2022, primarily counterterrorism operations in Helmand and Kandahar provinces. 1 deployment to Syria in 2022 for special reconnaissance missions along the Turkish border. Commander Richardson leaned forward. "What was your reason for leaving the Navy? 8 years is significant time investment, but it's not a full career commitment." Sarah had been dreading this question, knowing that her answer would reveal the most difficult chapter of her military experience. "I was medically retired in 2023 following injuries sustained during a combat operation in Afghanistan. I spent 18 months in rehabilitation and recovery before being cleared for civilian employment." The room fell silent as the implications of Sarah's answer settled over her colleagues. Admiral Hawthorne's expression shifted to one of deep respect mixed with concern. "Combat injuries," the Admiral said quietly. "I'm sorry you had to endure that experience. Are you comfortable discussing the nature of your injuries, or would you prefer to keep those details private?" Sarah appreciated the Admiral's sensitivity about what was clearly a painful subject. "I sustained traumatic brain injury and extensive shrapnel wounds to my left arm and torso during an IED explosion that killed 3 members of my team. I spent 8 months in military hospitals and underwent extensive rehabilitation to regain full cognitive and physical function. Tom Bradley looked stricken as he understood the magnitude of what Sarah had endured. "My God, Sarah, I had no idea. I'm so sorry for the persistent questioning about your background, if we'd known." "That's exactly why I didn't want to discuss it," Sarah interrupted gently. "I didn't want sympathy or special treatment. I just wanted the opportunity to prove myself based on my current abilities and qualifications." Admiral Hawthorne studied Sarah with new understanding. "Ms. Martinez, your desire for privacy is completely understandable, but you must realize that your military background fundamentally changes our assessment of your qualifications and potential contributions to this company." "I was hoping it wouldn't have to," Sarah admitted. "I've been trying to build a civilian identity that isn't defined by my military service. I wanted this job to be about what I can contribute now, not about what I did in the military." Commander Richardson shook his head. "Sarah, with all due respect, you're one of the most qualified security professionals I've ever encountered. Your military training and combat experience make you invaluable for this kind of work. Trying to hide that background is like a master chef applying for a dishwasher position." "But that's my choice to make," Sarah replied firmly. "I've earned the right to decide how I want to use my skills and experience. I don't want to be defined solely by my military service, especially the traumatic aspects of it." Admiral Hawthorne leaned forward, her expression serious but compassionate. "Ms. Martinez, I understand your perspective, and I respect your right to make decisions about your career path. However, I need to address some practical considerations that arise from your military background." Sarah felt her anxiety rising again. "What kind of considerations?" "First, your security clearance status," the Admiral explained. "As a former SEAL with multiple combat deployments, you likely hold or held high-level clearances that come with ongoing obligations and restrictions." "I held a top-secret clearance with SCI access," Sarah confirmed. "It was administratively downgraded when I was medically retired, but I still have obligations regarding classified information and foreign contacts." "Exactly," Admiral Hawthorne nodded. "Those obligations don't disappear just because you want to pursue civilian employment. There are also legal considerations regarding your employment in the security industry. Your background creates both opportunities and responsibilities that you can't simply ignore." Tom interjected with obvious concern. "Are you saying there are legal problems with Sarah working here?" "Not problems," the Admiral clarified, "but considerations. Former Special Operations personnel are valuable targets for foreign intelligence services. There are also federal regulations regarding the employment of former military personnel in certain private security roles." Sarah felt the weight of complications she'd hoped to avoid settling over her new civilian life. "Admiral, I've been completely compliant with all post-service requirements and regulations. I've had no contact with foreign entities, and I've maintained all required security protocols." "I'm sure you have," Admiral Hawthorne replied. "But the reality is that someone with your background and experience represents both tremendous value and potential risk for any organization that employs them." Commander Richardson looked confused. "Risk? Sarah has been exemplary in every aspect of her work here." "The risk isn't from Sarah herself," the Admiral explained. "The risk is that foreign intelligence services, criminal organizations, or other hostile entities might attempt to exploit her employment here to gain information about our clients, operations, or security procedures." Sarah felt her heart sinking as she realized that revealing her military background had created exactly the kinds of complications she'd hoped to avoid. "Are you saying that my military service makes me unemployable in the civilian security industry?" "Absolutely not," Admiral Hawthorne said firmly. "I'm saying that your military service makes you extraordinarily valuable, but it also requires careful management of security and operational considerations." Tom looked overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation. "So what does this mean for Sarah's employment here? Are we required to terminate her position or restrict her duties?" Admiral Hawthorne considered the question carefully. "That depends on several factors, including the specific nature of your client contracts, the level of security clearance required for various positions, and Sarah's own preferences regarding how she wants to utilize her background and experience." Sarah felt frustrated by the way her colleagues were discussing her future without including her in the decision-making process. I appreciate everyone's concern, but I'd like to have some input into decisions about my career and employment. Of course, Admiral Hawthorne replied apologetically. Sarah, what would you like to see happen with your position here? Do you want to continue working at the entry level you originally applied for, or would you be interested in positions that better utilize your military training and experience? The question forced Sarah to confront the decision she'd been avoiding for 3 years. She'd left the military hopping to build a normal civilian life, but her skills and experience kept drawing her back toward work that required exactly the background she was trying to leave behind. I'm not sure, she admitted honestly. Part of me wants to prove that I can succeed in civilian work based on my current abilities rather than my military experience. But I'm beginning to realize that my background is always going to be part of who I am, whether I acknowledge it or not. Commander Richardson spoke up. Sarah, speaking as someone who's also transitioned from military to civilian service, I understand the desire to establish a new identity. But trying to completely separate yourself from 8 years of elite military training is neither realistic nor necessary. The question, Admiral Hawthorne added, is how you want to integrate your military experience with your civilian career goals. There are ways to honor and utilize your background without being defined solely by it. As Sarah considered their words, she realized that her attempts to compartmentalize her life had created more problems than they'd solved. Her military training and experience were integral parts of who she was, and trying to hide or minimize them had led to suspicion, confusion, and missed opportunities. What would utilizing my military background look like in practical terms? She asked. Tom pulled out the organizational chart for Sentinel Security Solutions. Well, for starters, you're dramatically overqualified for your current position. With your background, you could be leading our maritime threat assessment team, developing training programs for our consultants, or heading up our special operations consulting division. We also have clients who specifically request consultants with special operations backgrounds, Commander Richardson added. Your experience would be invaluable for those assignments. Admiral Hawthorne nodded. And there are federal contracting opportunities that require security clearances and military experience. Your background could open doors for the company that wouldn't otherwise be available. Sarah felt torn between the opportunities her military background could provide and her desire to prove herself in the civilian world on her own merits. I need some time to think about this. The last 3 years have been about learning to be a civilian, and I'm not sure I'm ready to go back to being defined primarily by my military service. That's completely understandable, Admiral Hawthorne said. But consider this, you don't have to choose between being a veteran and being a civilian. You can be both. Your military service doesn't define you, but it is part of what makes you exceptional. Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed with an urgent message that would change the trajectory of the entire conversation. Tom's expression grew serious as he read a similar message on his own device. We have a situation, Tom announced. Admiral, your cargo shipment is reporting increased threat activity along the planned route. They're requesting immediate consultation and possible route modification. Admiral Hawthorne turned to Sarah with sudden intensity. Ms. Martinez, I know we've just had a significant conversation about your background, but I need to ask you a direct question. Would you be willing to provide tactical consultation for an active security situation? Sarah felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that she'd experienced countless times during her military service. Despite her ambivalence about utilizing her military background, she couldn't ignore the call to help with a situation that might involve the safety of innocent people. What kind of tactical consultation? She asked. Real-time threat assessment and countermeasure development for a high-value cargo shipment that's encountering hostile activity, Admiral Hawthorne explained. The kind of consultation that requires someone with actual combat experience and tactical expertise. Sarah looked around the room at her colleagues, realizing that this moment represented a crossroads in her civilian career. She could continue trying to minimize her military background, or she could embrace her unique qualifications and use them to make a meaningful contribution. I'll help, she said finally. But I want everyone to understand that this doesn't mean I've decided how I want to integrate my military experience with my civilian career long-term. Admiral Hawthorne smiled for the first time since the meeting began. Understood. But Sarah, I have a feeling that once you experience how your military training can make a difference in civilian security work, you might find the integration more natural than you expect. As Sarah prepared to dive into her first real tactical consultation since leaving the military, she couldn't help but wonder if Admiral Hawthorne might be right. Perhaps her attempts to separate her military and civilian identities had been preventing her from fully utilizing the gifts and abilities that her service had given her. The next few hours would test not only her tactical skills, but also her resolve to keep her past and present lives separate. Within minutes, the conference room at Sentinel Security Solutions had transformed into an active tactical operations center. Sarah found herself standing before multiple monitors displaying real-time satellite imagery, communication intercepts, and threat assessment data that felt startlingly familiar despite her 3 years away from military operations. Admiral Hawthorne was coordinating with the cargo ship's security team via encrypted satellite communications, while Commander Richardson worked with regional maritime authorities to track hostile vessel movements in the area. Tom Bradley managed information flow between various civilian and military agencies that were providing intelligence support. "Sarah, I need your assessment of this tactical situation," Admiral Hawthorne called out, pointing to a large display showing the cargo ship's current position and surrounding threat indicators. "We have multiple small vessels converging on the cargo ship's position, and the traditional countermeasures aren't working." Sarah moved to the display, studying the tactical layout with the analytical skills she developed during countless combat missions. The familiar rush of operational thinking flooded back, bringing clarity and focus she hadn't experienced since leaving the military. "The attackers are using a coordinated pincer movement," she observed, tracing the hostile vessel patterns on the display. "They're not just pirates looking for an opportunistic attack. This is a sophisticated operation with tactical coordination and real-time communication between vessels." Admiral Hawthorne nodded grimly. "That's exactly what we're seeing. The cargo ship's security team is requesting guidance on defensive positioning and countermeasures." Sarah examined the navigation charts and threat vectors, her military training automatically generating tactical options. The cargo ship needs to alter course immediately to break the attacker's coordination. If they maintain current heading, they'll be trapped in a kill zone where the hostile vessels can attack from multiple directions simultaneously. "What course modification would you recommend?" Commander Richardson asked, pulling up navigation software on his workstation. Sarah moved to the navigation display, calculating vectors and timing with the precision that had kept her alive during multiple combat deployments. "Come to heading 270 degrees for 15 minutes, then adjust to 185 degrees. This will force the hostile vessels to choose between pursuing individually or breaking off to regroup." Admiral Hawthorne relayed the course recommendations to the cargo ship while monitoring the tactical situation. "They're implementing your navigation changes now. What about defensive countermeasures?" "The security team needs to establish overlapping fields of fire covering the most likely approach vectors," Sarah replied, highlighting specific areas on the tactical display. "Position 2 shooters aft to cover the stern approach, 2 shooters port side to cover the flanking attack, and maintain 1 roving shooter to respond to unexpected developments." As the cargo ship implemented Sarah's tactical recommendations, the hostile vessels began responding exactly as she had predicted. The coordinated attack began to fragment as the attackers found themselves unable to maintain their planned assault formation. "It's working," Admiral Hawthorne reported with obvious relief. "The hostile vessels are breaking off their coordinated approach. 2 vessels are maintaining pursuit, but they've lost their tactical advantage." Sarah felt the familiar satisfaction of successful tactical planning, the knowledge that her skills and experience were making a real difference in protecting innocent people. Despite her ambivalence about embracing her military background, she couldn't deny the effectiveness of her training in situations like this. "The pursuing vessels will likely attempt to close distance during the next hour," she advised. "The security team should maintain heightened alert status and be prepared for potential boarding attempts or standoff weapons attacks." Tom Bradley looked up from his communication station. "Sarah, the cargo ship's security chief is asking if we can provide ongoing tactical consultation for the remainder of their transit through high-threat waters." The request forced Sarah to confront the reality that her military expertise was not just useful, but potentially essential for protecting people in dangerous situations. She realized that her attempts to distance herself from her military background might actually be preventing her from fulfilling her fundamental duty to help others when she had the capability to do so. "I can provide consultation for the remainder of their transit," she agreed. "But this needs to be understood as temporary assistance, not a permanent commitment to military-style operations." Admiral Hawthorne smiled knowingly. "Of course, though I suspect you'll find that using your skills to protect people is addictive, regardless of whether you're doing it in military or civilian contexts." Over the next 4 hours, Sarah provided continuous tactical guidance as the cargo ship navigated through increasingly dangerous waters. She developed countermeasures for 3 additional hostile approaches, coordinated with naval patrol aircraft to provide aerial reconnaissance, and helped the security team respond to electronic warfare attempts to disrupt their communications. Throughout the operation, Sarah felt herself slipping back into the tactical mindset that had defined her military career. The analytical clarity, strategic thinking, and calm decision-making under pressure came flooding back as if she'd never left the military at all. "Final threat cleared," Admiral Hawthorne announced as the cargo ship reached safe waters. "The security team reports successful transit with no casualties and no cargo loss. They're crediting your tactical guidance with preventing what could have been a catastrophic attack." Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction at the successful outcome, but also a growing realization that her military skills weren't just part of her past. They were an integral part of who she was and what she could contribute to the world. Commander Richardson approached Sarah as the tactical displays were being shut down. "That was exceptional work, Sarah. Your tactical expertise just saved millions of dollars in cargo and potentially prevented loss of life. How are you feeling about utilizing your military background now?" The question forced Sarah to confront the shift in her thinking that had occurred over the past few hours. "I'm beginning to understand that my military training isn't something I can simply set aside when it's inconvenient. These skills exist for a reason, and people's safety sometimes depends on them." Admiral Hawthorne joined the conversation. "Sarah, I want to show you something that might help clarify your thinking about integrating your military and civilian careers." The Admiral pulled out her phone and showed Sarah a photograph of a small brass plate mounted on her office wall. The inscription read, "The willingness of America's veterans to sacrifice for our country has earned them our lasting gratitude and our commitment to serve them as well as they served us." "That's a quote from President Obama," Admiral Hawthorne explained. "But I think it applies to more than just government service to veterans. I think veterans have an obligation to continue serving their country and their communities in whatever capacity they can, using whatever skills and experience they possess." Sarah studied the inscription, feeling the weight of its meaning. "You're suggesting that hiding my military background is actually a disservice to my country and community." "I'm suggesting that your military training and experience are gifts that come with responsibilities," the Admiral replied. "You've been given exceptional skills and knowledge that very few people possess. Using those skills to protect and serve others isn't just a career choice, it's a moral obligation." Tom Bradley nodded enthusiastically. "Sarah, what you accomplished today demonstrates exactly why we need people with your background in civilian security work. You didn't just apply military training to a civilian situation. You prevented a potential disaster that could have affected hundreds of people." As Sarah considered their words, she realized that her attempts to separate her military and civilian identities had been based on a false premise. She'd been thinking of her military service as something she'd done in the past, rather than something that had fundamentally shaped who she was and what she was capable of contributing. "I've been thinking about this wrong," she admitted. "I've been treating my military background like a burden I needed to overcome rather than a foundation I could build on." Admiral Hawthorne smiled. "That's a common mistake for veterans transitioning to civilian life. We sometimes think we need to become completely different people rather than finding new ways to apply our existing strengths and capabilities." Commander Richardson pulled out a chair for Sarah. "So what do you think? Are you ready to consider positions that fully utilize your military background and expertise?" Sarah sat down, rolling up her sleeve to reveal the tattoo that had remained hidden throughout her employment at Sentinel. The intricate design incorporated the SEAL trident, unit insignias from her deployments, and memorial elements honoring the teammates she'd lost in combat. Admiral Hawthorne's eyes widened as she recognized the significance of the tattoo's elements. "Sarah, that's one of the most meaningful military memorial tattoos I've ever seen. It tells the story of exceptional service and profound sacrifice." "It's why I keep it covered," Sarah explained. "This tattoo represents the most intense and meaningful experiences of my life, but it also represents trauma and loss that I'm still processing. I wasn't sure I was ready to share that story with civilian colleagues." Tom studied the tattoo with deep respect. "Sarah, that tattoo doesn't just represent trauma and loss. It represents honor, courage, and commitment that most people can't even imagine. You shouldn't have to hide that." Admiral Hawthorne leaned forward. "Sarah, I want to offer you a position that I think might provide the perfect integration of your military background and civilian career goals." "What kind of position?" Sarah asked. "I'm launching a new consulting firm that specializes in maritime security for humanitarian organizations," the Admiral explained. "We provide protection for medical supply shipments, refugee transport vessels, and disaster relief operations. The work requires military-level tactical expertise, but the mission is purely humanitarian." The offer struck Sarah as potentially perfect, an opportunity to use her military skills in service of humanitarian goals that aligned with her desire to make a positive difference in the world. "You would head our Tactical Operations Division," Admiral Hawthorne continued. "You'd be responsible for developing security protocols, training civilian security teams, and providing real-time tactical consultation for humanitarian missions operating in dangerous areas." Sarah felt excitement building as she considered the possibilities. "That sounds like exactly the kind of work I'd want to do, using my military training to protect people who are trying to help others." Commander Richardson smiled. "And it would allow you to fully embrace your military background while pursuing civilian humanitarian goals. You wouldn't have to choose between being a veteran and being a civilian. You could be both." As Sarah considered Admiral Hawthorne's offer, she realized that her journey from military service to civilian employment had been leading toward this moment. She needed time to process her military experiences and develop her civilian identity. But now, she was ready to integrate both aspects of her life into something meaningful and purposeful. "Admiral, I accept your offer," Sarah said, extending her hand for a firm handshake. "I'm ready to stop hiding my military background and start using it to make a difference in the world." Admiral Hawthorne shook Sarah's hand with obvious satisfaction. "Welcome to the team, Sarah. I have a feeling this is going to be the beginning of an extraordinary civilian career that honors everything you accomplished in military service." Tom Bradley looked pleased despite losing a valuable employee. "Sarah, I'm sorry to see you leave Sentinel, but I couldn't be happier about the opportunity Admiral Hawthorne is offering you. This is exactly where you belong." As Sarah prepared to begin this new chapter of her life, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Her attempts to hide her military background had created unnecessary complications and prevented her from fully utilizing her capabilities. But the experience had also taught her important lessons about integrating her past experiences with her future goals. She was no longer an active-duty Navy SEAL, but she was still a warrior. She was ready to serve her country and community in new ways, using the skills and experience that military service had given her to protect and help others. The tattoo on her arm would no longer be hidden. It would be a visible reminder of her commitment to service and her readiness to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Sarah Martinez had found her place in the civilian world, not by abandoning her military identity, but by finding new ways to honor and utilize everything her service had taught her. She was finally ready to be both a veteran and a civilian, using every aspect of her background to make the world a safer and better place.